Okay, dude, we've been covering all different types of topics here. Some of my favorite topics are when I get to wade off into your territory. We talked about the Siege of Vienna. We talked about Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, all these things.
Antikythera mechanism.
Yeah, Antikythera mechanism, Nineveh, all these things. That's all your area.
Sure.
That's all history, stuff like that. Today we're going to play in my sandbox.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is something you've been wanting to do for a while, ever since you knew I took the class. Would you like to set it up, and then I'll tell you who we're going to talk to?
Yeah, you hit me up with some really creative exam questions probably a year ago, and there was a lot going on. We were both busy and stuff. You'd be like, no, you need to read this. And you sent me maybe a screenshot, or you read a question to me. I was like, what is this class? And you're like, it's my nuclear propulsion class. I don't know. Was that what it's called?
Fusion propulsion.
It was something like that.
Fusion propulsion.
Fusion propulsion.
Yeah.
And naturally that melted my brain because I don't know how any of that stuff works. But it was fun to listen to you talk about it and describe it. And then we talked to Don Pettit at length a couple years back when he was in town. It was kind of fun to hear his musings about propulsion. I just never really thought about a bunch of the stuff that you kept bringing up as you were going through the class, and you were clearly having your mind opened, and it was really fun. I was like, I kind of want in. Can we do an episode where we talk about fusion propulsion and I try to learn a little bit too?
Yes. And so that's what I've arranged today. So to be clear, when you look at the academic calendar or all the course selections that are possible on your course of study, we are on the very, very far right side of my stuff.
Okay.
So this is a 795 class. So you're a freshman, you're taking the 101 classes, you move on through, like when you're graduating undergrad, you're taking the 400 level. This is 795. It's like one of the last things in the book. You've taught in school before, so when you're in that class, there's fewer people and the rules are a little bit different, right?
Yep.
I would say they're more relaxed and the focus is more on understanding, and you are this wizard of a professor and you're trying to train other professors or something like that. That's kind of the impression I get.
Yeah.
The wizard's trying to make more wizards.
My grad advisor said that wizards trying to make more wizards. Yes. My graduate advisor told me at one point that, at this level, once you get into this place in this program, you aren't out in the world being a professional yet, but you are a professional in this particular discipline or course of study. And so he's like, look, I'm not going to do anything moving forward to get you to do things. Just nothing. I assume you're here because you're curious and this is what you want to do and you can't help but be here. And if that turns out not to be the case, you will know to move on. And so, yeah, it's very, very different than the early goings of undergrad.
Now, I wouldn't say Dr. Cassibry did that. So it's Dr. Jason Cassibry at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, which is known for the propulsion classes that they teach at this school. This is where I go. And Dr. Cassibry is a really interesting guy. He is well-versed in all these things. He holds a lot of very high positions of standing in the field. So other people from other universities, if I said the name of the universities, you would recognize them. They all talk with Dr. Cassibry. There's this community, and he's well-respected in that community. And it's one of those weird things where I'm in this smaller town of Huntsville, Alabama, but because of our proximity to Marshall Space Flight Center, where they're doing all kinds of research on things you wouldn't believe. If I told you we had some of these things in Alabama, you'd be like, yeah, right. But we do. Dr. Cassibry works here because he has access to all those type of research projects. So today what I'd like to do is I'm going to call Dr. Cassibry. I'm going to patch him into this call, and I just want to start from ground zero and see if we can take you to fusion propulsion by the end of the episode. You game?
I'm more than game. I'm super excited.
So, the name of the podcast, No Dumb Questions. You just trust me, Dr. Cassibry, you don't have to act like you know anything around him. He is the coolest dude, but he's also wicked smart. And so he'll talk to you at whatever level you're at, and he'll get you to the next level. So
all right,
I'm going to call Dr. Cassibry, get him on here, and let's give it a shot. What do you say?
Can't wait. Let's get him on the horn.
Okay, Matt, you there?
Yeah, you got me.
Okay, Dr. Cassibry, you there?
Yeah, Matt. Hi, how are you?
Hey, nice to meet you, Dr. Cassibry. I'm doing great. You?
Oh, yeah, likewise. So I hear you were spearfishing today.
That is my style. I don't know. The town is called Spearfish, but I think you might actually get in trouble if you spearfish. I do have a fishing spear right here, like literally a foot from my right hand, but I've never inflicted it on a fish. I tend to do the fly rod thing.
He's in Spearfish, South Dakota. I may have misled you there.
I probably just quickly read it and went, oh, wow, spearfishing. Okay.
Yeah.
And
I thought we were all playing along. That's awesome. I should have just let you believe that that's something I do regularly.
So let me do a couple of intros real quick because I'm the common touch point between the three of us here. So Matt, this is Dr. Jason Cassibry, and I'll do a little bit more intro for him in just a second. But Dr. Cassibry, this is Matt Whitman. He was a pastor for several years out in Wyoming, recently moved over to South Dakota, and Matt and I, we talk about all kinds of stuff under the sun. He's the humanities guy. I don't know if you'd say I'm the science guy, but we kind of bounce ideas off of each other, but we're really good friends, and we connect on several different levels. And so I wanted to introduce you two because Matt has been wanting to learn about nuclear propulsion or fusion propulsion. But Matt, I want to tell you more about Dr. Cassibry real quick. So
please,
just so you understand the kind of person you're talking to here, don't let how open and friendly Dr. Cassibry is fool you. He's one of these guys that will quickly make you feel like a peer, but rest assured, we are not peers. you know what I mean?
I know the type.
Yeah,
I'm not going to agree with that statement, but that's very kind of you to say.
So Dr. Cassibry and I have a really interesting history. So he and I first met when he was on the committee for my master's thesis. And you know how you've got several people on the panel, and you've got your advisor, and you got the guy that is his discipline, and then you got this other person that's kind of like a referee, maybe, I don't know. So
like a third reader.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I don't know how you do it in the sciences if it's the same way as we do it, but so you were not his first reader, you were not his advisor, you were the extra guy that's in the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were talking to me. I thought you guys were going back and forth.
No.
Yeah, basically.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you were my Dr. Peter Cha. I can track with that.
Okay. So there's more to Dr. Cassibry that you need to know. So if you in the nuclear fusion world, when it comes to propulsion, he's the guy. And here at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, he has a whole device set up on a military installation. It's called Charger 1, but he has a huge device that's an experimental fusion unit that he can use to test things. And more than that, if you were to write a paper in the history world, you would have the people you take it to and they get it peer reviewed and all that stuff, right?
Yep.
So Dr. Cassibry is that person for fusion propulsion. There's an organization in the engineering world called AIAA, the American Institute of, help me, Dr. Cassibry.
American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, yep.
I'm supposed to know that. I'm a member. And so...
Hey, as long as you pay your dues, they don't care.
They don't care. He's over the committee for nuclear and future flight stuff. I mean, it's a big deal.
Wow.
So just recently, he was put in charge of that group, and it's just a really big deal to talk to Dr. Cassibry. But the other thing about Dr. Cassibry is... last semester in the fall, I had an option of taking several different classes, and I decided to go with fusion propulsion because I like how he teaches, and he's a reasonable professor, and but he also doesn't cut you slack. So
that's what a reasonable professor does.
Yeah, it's
by definition.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. But I don't know, how was that, Dr. Cassibry? Was that acceptable?
Oh, I thought that was a really great description. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so
I tell you what, I felt pretty honored to have you jump on with us, Dr. Cassibry. I feel more honored now. It's an amazing resume. Congratulations on an incredible lineup of accomplishments. That's fantastic.
I appreciate it, and likewise, it's an honor to get invited to do this podcast with you guys.
Well, it's appreciated.
Yeah.
Hey, let me ask you guys this. Can you hear that gully washer that is rolling over my house right now? Can you hear the rain?
Not at all.
Okay. Well, for the third chair, it's rain. What are you going to do?
There you go. So
yeah, what I think is really fun about this exercise is I like science. I was right on the fence between going humanities or sciences when I went into undergrad. I mean, I really went to major in baseball, so what I studied was less consequential. And I decided to go with history because I liked the guy who I met who taught history classes. And that ended up being kind of a fateful decision. But I continue to be really, really intrigued by your world, even if I don't speak the language and don't understand everything. And what I thought would be fun about this exercise would be to see if you guys can make sense of nuclear propulsion for a guy who knows literally nothing, just some schmo off the street. I thought it'd be kind of a fun contest to see if I can understand anything at the end of this exercise.
I accept your challenge, and if it's not successful, then I'll own the failure. How's that?
Oh, you do not yet understand the depths of my ineptitude. Let's see how that goes.
So let me set this up here. So just to give you an idea of the way Dr. Cassibry normally talks here, I'm looking at my final exam here. This is a question he wrote. And I'll just read it to you. Construct a Lindell-Widener diagram for magnetic fields of 0, 1, 10, 100, and 1,000 Tesla for a DD plasma with I guess it's rho RG, basically with all these different parameters. It's a long sentence that it's going to be hard to read in English. Label the contours appropriately and explain the lower left bounds and how and why the magnetic fields in liner affects the results. So that's like question 2 of 4. And so he's used to talking at that level. But at the same time, what I enjoyed about the class is we can back it up and we can speak more top level broad. And I guess we should start with this, Matt. What do you know about rockets? So we give Dr. Cassibry a baseline here.
Okay. Well, the rockets are normally fueled chemically, like I guess kind of the more complex version of what an engine. Well, I guess it's not an internal combustion engine because rockets move differently. It's the expulsion factor, right? You are condensing down the release of energy to create thrust. Am I in the zip code?
Yeah, that's in the right ballpark. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the end, and they're shaped like hot dogs with fins on the end. There, I think I've exhausted my knowledge.
Yeah. So I'll fill in just a little bitty bit, and then I'll get out of the way. So like any vehicle, you have gas mileage, right? So you have the distance that you can travel with a certain amount of fuel. And the problem with a rocket is that you can't refuel it once it leaves your planet. An ideal rocket you would leave the planet and you would constantly accelerate till you get about halfway, and then you start decelerating. Like if you had infinite fuel and resources, that's what you would do. And you would go faster and faster and faster, and then you'd hit the brakes about halfway and start slowing down, depending on if you were going to do a rendezvous or flyby or things like that. What's interesting about fusion propulsion is that it isn't real right now. Is that safe to say, Dr. Cassibry?
We are fresh out of working fusion reactors, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, Matt, do you know what fusion is?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's one of 2 processes, right? You got fusion and fission. These are both nuclear processes. One puts together, the other cuts in half. At the level of it's nuclear. So at the level of the nucleus, is that a fair assumption?
That's a pretty good description. Yeah, I thought you said you didn't know anything. That's not bad.
I'm just guessing based on what the words sound like so far.
Well, yeah. We have, I guess, 3 types of reactions that are common in... Well, chemical is the common one for propulsion, and we're working towards being able to do fusion. And fission is one that I think is going to see application in space in the next 10 years if we ever come out of this pandemic.
Okay.
So chemical reactions are the things that you're used to. Your car does internal combustion, and aircraft, also does combustion, and so do rockets. And that's the one that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. In fission, you use uranium or another heavy isotope, but usually uranium, and it gets hit by a neutron, and then it goes unstable and splits, and that releases a lot of energy, nuclear energy. And then in fusion, the fuels would be deuterium or tritium or proton and 11 boron and helium-3. Those are some of the more common fuels. And yes, they basically combine together and form heavier isotopes in general, but not always. and then they release a lot of energy as well.
In the fusion scenario you described, why does that electron destabilize the uranium?
If I said electron, I misspoke. It's a neutron.
I may have misheard.
Yeah.
The neutron. Okay. I mean, why does it do that?
That's a bit out of my area of expertise, but basically a nucleus has certain, configurations that provide a stable nucleus. And it has to do with a mixture of the way the protons and the neutrons bond together individually and then in pairs and groups. Kind of like in chemistry, there are, I think, certain rules that sort of allow configurations to assemble together. And then if you throw a neutron in, depending on the isotope, it kind of messes up the configuration and then it just kind of falls apart. Now, why it does that, I don't know. The specific details, I'm not sure of. But it has something to do with that. So I really can't answer your question in a very quantitative way, but
no, that's okay. That's okay. I'm digging all the way back to like 11th grade here. So I'm sorry. There's going to be a lot of idiot questions, which according to the name of the podcast, there aren't. So just to make sure I'm picturing everything properly.
Yeah.
The electrons orbit the nucleus, right? But the protons are in the nucleus?
So you have protons and neutrons in the nucleus.
And a neutron has no charge.
Yeah, the neutron has no charge to it. The proton has a charge of +1, and then the electrons have a charge of -1.
So an ion is when it's not balanced. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. If it loses an electron, then it becomes a positively charged ion.
Okay.
So
and
this
uranium, that's like way up there on the periodic scale. So there's a bunch of goofy stuff going on with those kind of elements, right?
Oh yeah, all the really high ones that seem to have the name with "eum" in the end.
You bring up an interesting point, Matt, because when I started taking the class, I heard the word nuclear, and I thought two things. I thought uranium and plutonium. Those are the two things I thought.
Yeah.
When we started into the effort in the class, I noticed that all the math we were doing were for hydrogen and helium and deuterium, and it's the small elements. So it's the other side of the periodic table, which makes sense if you think about what you're doing. You following that?
Well, help it make sense to me. Yeah, it stood out to me as well as we were just kind of running through that quick rundown on the fusion and fission side. But yeah, I thought it was all the EM elements as well. I don't understand why there would be advantage to working on the low end of the periodic table.
Oh, well, it's not obvious the answer to that question. But both ends of the periodic table sort of work in terms of having fuels for nuclear energy. And it has to do with how the isotopes are stable. And so iron, I think, is among the most stable species. And then if you go in either direction from iron on the periodic table, you start to have an opportunity for doing fission or fusion and releasing energy. But it's only certain ones that actually are worthwhile because they're easier to induce those reactions, like deuterium and tritium on one end of the periodic table, or uranium or plutonium on the other end. But your question as to why should we bother with fusion if fission works, is that kind of the question you were asking?
Well, yeah, I'm certainly curious about that. And which one does the sun do? Is that fission?
Yeah, the sun does fusion.
Fusion, okay.
Yeah, it fuses hydrogen and maybe to some lesser degree deuterium. I think it goes off of something called the carbon cycle, and different stars will have different fusion cycles and fuels depending on how big they are and what state they are in terms of their lifespan. But fission of the two nuclear reactions tends to be easier to do because if you have enough of U-235, that's the isotope that will undergo fission by itself, you have enough of it and then stir in some water and put it in a barrel, it'll heat up. So it'll start undergoing reactions because it naturally decays, and the neutrons that get kicked off will slow down from the water and then get reabsorbed by more uranium, and then the process will continue. If you have the right materials, making a reactor out of uranium is not hard. But the reason that we might want to go to fusion is because it kind of helps with the nuclear waste cleanup after the fact, at least in principle. So like with fission, you have fuel rods that you have to dispose of somewhere, and then you get all of these activated components that you have to bury in concrete or do something with. And so it becomes a very expensive hassle to deal with. Now, having said that, I'm not poo-pooing fission at all because fission produces a whole lot of energy, and it's woefully underutilized. I think it has a better environmentally friendly footprint than a lot of other things. We just have to continue working on the management of it. But fusion doesn't have spent fuel rods to deal with. It'll still have some activation issues that you'll have to manage, but it doesn't have the fuel rods that just sit somewhere and either are buried or have to be managed somehow. And it's harder to proliferate fusion than it is with fission. So there's that sort of a homeland security issue, I suppose, that might go with it.
Can I jump in real quick and ask you a couple more incredibly simple questions?
Sure.
Okay, so sun is fusion.
Uh-huh.
What about the bombs from World War II? Were those fission bombs?
So in World War II, those were both fission bombs. The first one was uranium-based, and then the second one, I think, was plutonium.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then like the plants that have gone wrong, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, are those fission reactors or fusion reactors?
We don't have any fusion reactors, so those are all fission reactors. Yeah, Chernobyl was based on an old reactor design, and we've since made a lot of improvements, and all the ones in America are made in a way that they can't fail in the way that Chernobyl did and have the meltdown.
Okay.
Fukushima is a modern reactor, but they had a 9+ scale, Richter scale earthquake, and a 30-foot tsunami hit it. So I kind of feel like they should be given a pass for that. I mean, it was a bad disaster, but I mean, come on. I mean,
This is why I like Dr. Cassibry's classes, because he's like, okay, yeah, so I'm going to give you the answer, but then I'm going to give you the engineering anecdotes that you need to know from like a more experienced engineer. But to be clear, nuclear energy is safe, and it is by far the way to go in my mind, Matt. Right now, everybody's talking about a green future or like zero waste energy production or, a low carbon footprint. Nuclear is the answer. Nuclear is the bridge to a clean energy future. I strongly believe that.
And you're suggesting that fusion would be the even better bridge over fission. Am I hearing you right?
I would not say that. I think there's a portfolio of energy methods that are really good. So you've got hydroelectric dams, but we've kind of exhausted our potential for doing that. We've got dams in all the rivers and places. Fission is woefully underutilized because there are lots of things like fast breeder reactors and things that can make use of those spent fuel rods and make a lot more use of the potential energy available. And then fusion and then solar, especially in remote places like deserts where there's lots of land and lots of sunlight. So I think we're better off if we have a good portfolio of different energy options to basically be robust against single point failures of one thing or another.
So to be clear, earlier when you said we are fresh out of fusion reactors,
Yeah.
You mean like we're not fresh out. You mean like we've never figured it out. We can't do that.
Yes, that's right. But if anyone's listening, if you just send me a $500,000 contract, I've got all the problems worked out in a notebook.
I would love it if that's what made this all come together.
So you actually, Matt, did touch on something that was very interesting. So when you're creating an energy source, I mean, the ultimate idea, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Cassibry, is you want to heat up water, turn it into steam, and then turn a turbine with that. Is that correct?
That's probably the most practical way to do it. Yep.
So Matt, there's this thing called gain in engineering, and it's like, how much energy do I put in versus how much energy do I get out? Or you'll hear, we're going for a gain of 1 or better. So basically, we want to get more energy out than we put in. So we call that the break-even point. And so right now, if you imagine what we're doing, we're trying to squish these isotopes together in a really fancy way so that this huge energetic event happens. So what do you need to do that? You need intense pressure. You need a super high temperature, would you say, Dr. Cassibry?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have to squeeze things together really, really hard. And when I say really, really hard, I'm saying to the point where traditional methods to measure pressure and temperature, that physics starts to break down. And so when I walked into the classroom, I had never heard of an electron volt. Have you ever heard of an electron volt, Matt?
No, I mean, I've heard of both of those words separately.
So an electron volt is a unit of temperature, you could say. Is that fair to say?
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's basically ridiculous levels. So like you have the normal engineering units that you deal with, which is like Kelvin, Celsius, pascals, gigapascals.
Sure.
And then you have the stupid level. And everything we did in this class, you only use stupid units. I mean, it's insane. So can you please explain an electron volt, Dr. Cassibry?
Sure. Well, it is used as both a unit of energy and as a unit of temperature. And when we talk about it in the context of temperature, it is equal to 11,605 Kelvin. Units are always a pain in engineering. Like when I teach undergrad courses, one of the first things I do is apologize for English units, and then we learn them. And when people gripe, I ask them what is their height in centimeters. And when they give me that cold blank stare, I explain that the reason that we have mixture sets of units is because people in different groups and cultures get comfortable with using a certain set of units because the numbers are convenient. And so plasma physicists like to use an EV because when you calculate that it's 11,605 Kelvin from its energy definition, it is very easy to talk in terms of temperatures of the plasma in terms of either EV or KeV, because people like to deal with numbers of ones and tens and hundreds. So 1 EV is about like 10,000 Kelvin, and 10 EV is 100,000, and 100 EV is a million. And then when you talk about fusion, you talk about KeV temperatures, so a kilo electron volt, and so that is 1,000 times hotter. So 1 EV is 11,605 Kelvin, and 1 KeV would be 11,605 Kelvin. And then to burn the plasma, to actually do fusion, you need around 10 KeV, roughly, minimum. And so that's about 100 million Kelvin. Crazy high temperatures.
I don't even know. I mean, I don't have a context for that, obviously.
Yeah.
So
you're starting to see the
where
problem.
does an electron volt fit into that? Is an electron volt like a way to just have a next unit to quantify something that big? Or is it measuring something different?
Well, so I'm going to flunk the pop quiz on this one because it's been a long time since we went over this. But an electron volt has to do with the definition that an electron being pulled out of a potential well. And what I mean is literally like a voltage. So if you pull an electron through so much voltage from a point source out, it's equal to 1 EV, and it's connected back to the charge. And that all ties in with the SI units. And so when you back out what that energy is, the potential energy, once you know what the energy is, you can connect that to the equivalent random thermal energy of a system. And when you equate those two and back out then what its temperature would be by that definition, you find that 1 EV corresponds to 11,605 Kelvin. Fundamentally, it comes back to what's the charge on an electron and how much energy does it take on when you move it through, I think, a 1 volt potential, if I remember correctly, but it's been a while.
This episode of No Dumb Questions is sponsored by HelloFresh, which, as you know, we love. Matt, what is HelloFresh?
It's America's #1 meal kit delivery service where they take really, really smart people and they have them think about food people would like to eat and then what it would take for those normal people to make that food. And they go and find all the ingredients and they pre-measure them and they send them to your house all fresh and ready to go. And then you or any normal person can just follow the recipe card and make awesome food and learn things about cooking and eat things that taste good. How'd I do?
Yeah, that was excellent. My favorite thing to do is make one of these meals with my kids. I've done that a few times. I've done it a couple times myself. My wife can make these so incredibly fast. And every once in a while I'll say, I'm kind of hungry. And she'll be like, boom, hello. It's like waving a magic wand or something. And like it just happens.
You look away for a second and food happens.
It's incredible. And my favorite one by far is the Tuscan sausage spaghetti. It's absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, HelloFresh has all kinds of other things that I'm sure you care about. I do, but the food is the main attractor to me. But there's things like the fact that they are prepared sustainably. You know, they kind of minimize packaging. The fact that it's flexible for your lifestyle. You can pause it if you're going out of town, things like that. They give back. So they've donated over 2.5 million meals to charity last year, and they're ramping that up here this year because of the coronavirus crisis. So it's great company.
So if you want to get HelloFresh, and I certainly hope that you'll want to get HelloFresh, you can go to HelloFresh.com/60NDQ. That's a new promo code. So again, it's HelloFresh.com/60NDQ and use the code 60NDQ. That's 60NDQ, which gets you $60 off your first 3 weeks, including free shipping on your first box.
It's awesome. If you can get the Tuscan sausage spaghetti, I highly recommend it. You can go online and pick whatever meals you like. Of course, the steak and sass is like an all-time favorite. Go get those. Check them out.
Yeah.
Try something that you wouldn't eat otherwise. You can kind of expand your horizons a little bit, but I've never had one that I didn't like. I've eaten every bite of every meal I've ever had with HelloFresh. It's amazing.
Strongly agree on the trying things that I normally wouldn't try. My daughter and my wife just made this cheesy Italian hot chicken pasta, which I would just never think to go and get those things and do that. And they put it all together and it completely worked and was spectacular. So yeah, broadening the horizons is another bonus. So go to HelloFresh.com/60NDQ and use the code 60NDQ, 60NDQ, to get $60 off your first 3 weeks, including free shipping on your first box. Additional restrictions apply. Please visit HelloFresh.com for more details.
Yeah, you should totally do this. Go to HelloFresh.com/60NDQ and use the code 60NDQ to get $60 off your first 3 weeks, including free shipping on your first box. Additional restrictions apply. Visit HelloFresh.com for more details. Should we go learn more about fusion propulsion, Matt?
Absolutely. This is humbling and good, and I want more.
Let's go. I'm going to pull you back top level, Matt. So basically, we have this concept of we have to do things with materials that we don't normally use.
Okay.
We have to create ridiculous pressures and ridiculous temperatures that humans don't even know how to talk about. And we have to do all this, and we have to make that happen. And so that requires an incredible amount of energy to make that happen. And then after it happens, you have to somehow figure out how to harvest the energy from that. So this is a very
the harvesting method that you mentioned, I mean, the typical one is the turbine and the steam.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Don't even worry about that. Let's just,
okay. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm not worrying about it.
Are you worried about it? Not at all. So these are the engineering challenges that Dr. Cassibry is thinking about. So the interesting thing is humans are working on fusion. So Dr. Cassibry has positioned himself and a team of other researchers. They're looking at, okay, we're just going to assume that humans figure this out. Once they figure it out, we need to figure out how to create this into a propulsion device to put it on the back of a rocket. And the reason we do this is, why would you think, Matt? Why would we care about fusion propulsion over a normal rocket?
Okay, let me list my guesses. Don't tell me if I'm way off on any of these or it'll screw up my further guesses. One, I'm guessing that fusion propulsion would be more powerful and more efficient. I'm two, guessing that you wouldn't have to have a gigantic reservoir of chemical fuel, and that would, increase payloads and just make everything more efficient in terms of actually accomplishing objectives in space. Three, I would think that, how do I want to put this? I would think that the fusion option in space would, I don't know the terminology. I can draw it like a picture in a cartoon. I would picture it being more effective for making maneuvers in space, including, I don't know the term, but like firing backwards in order to slow your progress. It would enable you to not have to do the just accelerate to a certain distance and then slow down thing, because I would guess that if you're traveling in space, you assume that's a clear path, but what if it weren't? You'd want to have the options to make changes, and this would provide you with that. And also, it would help to address the problem you brought up forth at the beginning of the inability to refuel in space. If you have a nearly limitless fuel supply like this, that kind of renders that point moot. Any of those useful?
Well, that was a darn near perfect. So I can't improve on that. You guys have been a great audience. Thank you. That was excellent.
That was a really good job, Matt. That was a really good job.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I thought you said this guy didn't know anything about technical aspects of space travel. He just nailed it.
Yeah, he did.
I'm guessing.
Well, it's a lot of Matt's very good at abstract thought, and fusion propulsion is very abstract, but it's also very hard as well. It's a real science too. So don't take that as a dig, Dr. Cassibry. So basically, all that's right. But I had an aha moment sitting in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And that aha moment was when you pencil whipped on the board and you said, hey, let's go to this moon of Neptune. Where's Sedna again, by the way?
Oh gosh, Sedna has a highly elliptical orbit. I think it's around like maybe 50 AU out right now, but it goes way out there, like maybe 300 or 3,000 AU. I can't remember which one of those off the top of my head. But it's
sorry, I hear AU, I think gold. What is AU?
Sorry, astronomical unit. That's 1.15 times 10 to the 11 meters.
Good heavens.
It's huge. Yeah, it's a big number. It's basically the distance. 1 AU is the distance between here and the sun. And that's a convenient measure for solar system travel because everything is a number like half or 1 or 10 or 20 or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Okay. I have mental note.
you were up there pencil whipping on the board and you were going to send Brock Blastoff out to Sedna or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you said, hey, how big of a ship do we need to build in order to get there? And how many years does it take to get there with this method of propulsion and this method of propulsion and this method of propulsion? Mm-hmm. And every time we did the math, assuming fusion propulsion is something that humans can figure out, it's like an order of magnitude faster.
Yeah.
And it makes things possible. Like, for example, with chemical rockets right now, we're just not going to leave the solar system. It's just not going to happen. Would you agree with that?
Because of time.
It's really hard to do. And if you do it, so we do have a couple of things. We have 4 satellites that I can think of leaving the solar system and one we're still talking to. So Voyager 1 and 2, and 2 is still awake. And then we have Pioneer. Was it? I forget the numbers for those. 10 and 11, maybe?
I don't remember.
But the way you do it with chemical is you do planetary swing bias to get an extra delta V and kick it out of the solar system. So it's doable, but you can't get those fast burnout speeds that you can with nuclear-based propulsion systems. Recently so last fall I had to give this talk on interstellar travel using nuclear technologies, fission, fusion, and antimatter. And I was asked to do this, and you do these things and agree to it because, well, shoot, if I don't, then somebody else will do it, and then they'll get the credit and the bullet on the resume, so I better do it. So then I had to go off and study antimatter especially, because I don't know squat about it other than, some of the basic reactions and how much energy comes out. But I learned a lot. I found this it was an AIAA short course that was taught by Bob Frisbee, who once in a while you'll see commenting on one of those weird alien shows on Discovery Channel or something like that. But he was a really good, serious scientist. And before him, there was this guy, Bob Ford, and they did a lot of work on this kind of stuff. And Frisbee had come up with this ingenious way of capturing all the propulsion technologies and laying them out against any destination you could think of to show which ones make sense to do where. And it all comes back to the energy density in the fuel. And that kind of tells you which propulsion concepts are good candidates for different missions. And you can kind of see clearly that for Earth and maybe Mars, that or certainly the moon, it's hard to beat chemical. But when you get to Mars, nuclear thermal really trades off nicely, nuclear electric, if you can make some assumptions about improvements in that technology. And then when you start to push out farther, like say Jupiter and Saturn and so on, then it's fusion and fission fusion hybrids, or let's call it like exotic gas core fission, where you're creating explosions or plasmas that blast out a nozzle rather than a reactor that you use heat transfer to heat up a gas. And those things really look good for pretty much anything within our solar system. Then when you go interstellar, it's really a stretch to use anything other than antimatter. And even then, it's hard.
I thought antimatter was science fiction. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh, no, there's an antimatter chamber here in Alabama.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I get for reading history all the time.
Well, you need to spend more time in Alabama.
Yeah, lightning makes antimatter.
Happy to do so.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that was actually discovered by a professor at UAH in the, I think in the atmospheric sciences department. It might be the space physics department. And I apologize for not remembering exactly who it was. But yeah, they found out that it's such a high voltage differential between the cloud to ground during a thunderstorm. And they started taking measurements across the spectrum, and they found, antimatter, it gets produced. And it's basically just a linear particle accelerator. Maybe an inefficient one, but still.
Michael Briggs.
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's him.
So just listening to these descriptions of different types of propulsion that would be needed for each of these different ranges. So if you were leaving Earth to go to the farthest reaches to do interstellar travel, you're not getting off Earth with antimatter, right? You'd use chemical to get into orbit and then you'd switch? Or would you just go with whatever from the get-go?
No, you have to use different propulsion systems for different parts of the trip based on the convenience of it. So
that's an excellent question, by the way. That is an excellent question. Good job.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Thanks.
To get off the ground, you really need chemical propulsion. You need rockets because it all comes down to thrust to weight. You got to get over the Earth's gravity well to get out. We don't really have anything better than that at the moment. But once you're in orbit and you're in space, then you can kind of take your time and use something that has less thrust, but higher exhaust velocity in that propellant to get you where you want to go. And that's where your fuel efficiency comes into play. And if you can burn for a really long time, like say for a month or a couple of months, then you can get up to really, really high velocities. And coming back to a point that you made earlier, Matt, about why we would want to do this, essentially you want to have the ability to speed up to really high velocities and then turn the ship backwards and fire the rockets again for a while to slow back down to get to your destination.
So that's one thing I learned in this class, Matt. So there are different types of rendezvous things that have to happen. For example, Dr. Cassibry, correct me when I get it wrong. Please forgive me for not remembering exactly, but it's called the beta factor, correct?
Yeah, you're talking about Wolfgang Moeckel's model, in which beta basically weights the trip time and the distance into the calculation.
Exactly. So if I want to go just out.
Wait, hang on. Let me pull up your grades. I can make a change of grade in case you get something wrong. Just give me a second.
There you go. So basically, if I'm going to do a rendezvous with a planet and I'm going to land there, I have to hit the gas all the way, and at halfway, I'm going to flip around and I'm going to hit the brakes, right?
Yep.
The rest of the way. If I want to do just I guess that would be a rendezvous, correct?
Yes,
then I
that's
would
correct.
do a return. I could just hit the gas and go, and I'd have to slow down, and then I'd have to hit the gas when I leave there and hit the brakes on the way back. So there's all these different modes that you have to use these propulsion systems. And so as I'm sitting there in class and I'm looking at this graph, and it was a big paper written by Frisbee and what was the other guy's name?
Bob Forward.
So they wrote this big PDF, and it was like they kind of packaged up all of their knowledge in their career and they handed it off to the next generation. And they were like, hey, next generation, you're going to have to figure this out. And what it felt like to me is some kind of Viking culture that said something like, hey, we figured out a way to make bigger boats. And if you make these big boats, you can go to different places, you know? That's what it felt like. It's just really interesting to read it because, you know, if you were going to the library, you know, 2 blocks away, you might take a little scooter. If you're going across 10 blocks away, you might take a motorcycle. Across town, you take a car. You could get pretty far on a car, but at some point you get on an airplane. And so it's really interesting, the point you brought up, Matt, about needing different propulsion systems for different applications. So I remember I was in West Africa, and we had to get on a taxi, and we went to this one place in Dakar, Senegal, and that's where all the taxis were. And if you wanted to go to a different country, you had to get on one of those taxis. But you all went to one central location to find your taxi and say, hey, are you going to the Gambia? Hey, are you going to Cameroon? Wherever they were going. And so I can imagine a place in space where we park all these taxis and the big Fusion Blaster 3000 or whatever we call these things, I can imagine you go get up and you link up with a tugboat and you get on board and you go to wherever you're supposed to go. Like, this is really far out there stuff that we're thinking about, but it's all physically possible.
And yet a guy who made a TV show in the 60s had the same idea. I mean, isn't that Roddenberry's vision that you would have a spaceport, that there would be some sort of tug that maneuvered these great big vessels, that they use this burst impulse power for short range travel? And then obviously I have no idea what the warp drive concept is even supposed to be. I just know it's very, very, very fast, and they put numbers next to it. And I have no idea if the science of Roddenberry holds up at all, but it seems like he was at least asking the same question you are.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And a lot of what influences a number of us that work in this area is Star Trek or Star Wars or, pick your other favorite sci-fi. For me, it was those two. So they make up a lot of stuff, obviously, and sometimes that's a convenient, plot, technology and science are plot armor against, whatever's going on against the protagonist that episode. But there's a lot of thought put in, and I think they consult with a lot of scientists in order to put those shows together. So the impulse engine on Star Trek, I think, is fusion propulsion combined with some sort of, inertial damper or mass reduction system so that, whatever you squirt out the exhaust, your F is equal to MA and M is somehow magically tiny. And so that gets some very high sublight speeds and makes efficient use of the exhaust. We're working on half of the technology for the impulse engine.
Force equals mass times acceleration. Is that the F equals MA?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You're saying that my beloved Star Trek episodes from the 60s with Bill Shatner running around, that they didn't totally have that formula balanced?
No, I would say that I think the concept for the Enterprise and other ships like that, the idea behind the impulse engine was a sublight capability in which they had some device on board that would effectively reduce the mass of the ship, and then their exhaust is a fusion exhaust. So it's pushing on what might feel like a postage stamp so that their acceleration is really high, even though they've got this giant ship that they're actually pushing. I think that's what the impulse engine was supposed to be.
It took 2 runs at the explanation, but I got it on the second one.
Okay, yeah.
So Matt, let me say one other thing real quick. So you casually mentioned warp drive in this flippant kind of, I'm going to just say warp drive because that sounds fun and fancy. And then you kept moving on. If you have a question about warp drive, you're talking to one of the people in the world that know about it.
Well, I thought that was science fiction too. I mean, isn't it like a thing that's supposed to fold space or something? I mean, it seems ridiculous.
Well, it's theoretically possible, but really hard to do. I had a student, Joseph Agnew. He was an undergraduate student. He's now going to be a grad student with us. Approached me. I had just given a talk on fusion. And I tried to, after these things are over, make a mad dash to my vehicle to avoid picking up another student or something, because I just get so spread out. And he intercepted me. He's tall. He's got a big stride, tracked me down. And he said he wanted to work on warp drive. And I said, well, maybe what you could do is a review paper on the technology to kind of find out what the current thinking is and who's doing, what effort and all of that. And he did an amazing job on this. His paper was 10 times better as an undergrad paper than some of the professionals that speak on this subject. So it was excellent. Wow. It was a standing room only crowd when he gave his talk.
Wow.
Yeah, last summer. It was really, really good. But now we get contacted once or twice a week by people all over asking us about our warp drive lab, and nobody's building warp drive at the Propulsion Research Center. But yeah, so back to your real question. The idea behind one way to do this is to distort space-time somehow. And the first calculation that was done was by this guy, Abikuri, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he needed the mass equivalent energy of like Jupiter or even higher in order to be able to do it. And people have subsequently figured out how to fold space-time without violating known physics to get this down to something smaller and smaller. And so theoretically, they're making progress on figuring out how to do this in an energy efficient way. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say somebody is going to figure this out. We're going to have flying cars and warp drive someday. I don't personally know of what the tricks would be to get there, but I just like to think that the universe or God or whoever's in your heart that governs all of these things intends for us to not socially distance across the galaxy and the universe forever.
What I like about sitting in Dr. Cassibry's class, Matt, is A lot of people, you hear something, you're like, well, what about this? And the instantly, oh no, that's not possible. And the place he starts every time is, well, let's look at the math. Okay, well, in order for this equation to work, we have to figure out how to make this number bigger or this number smaller. It's never just no. I mean, maybe it is, after you do the math, but in the process of learning and discovering, it always starts with let's look at the math, and it's amazing how close you can get by back of the envelope estimations. When you hear warp drive, you're like, whatever, yeah, like Boba Fett and all that, you think about that. And a lot of that happens when, these serious scientists, they sit down and they dream, and they actually apply logic and reason to the problem, and they take it seriously. And what I've found, having sat in those classrooms and hear the seriousness with which they're discussed, a lot of it gets lost once it goes to media and someone writes an article about it. Once an article gets written in some kind of, Wired magazine or something like that, it's almost always wrong in how they present the information. Maybe you have different experiences, Dr. Cassibry, but it's a really weird thing.
It is. Like one time I was asked some questions about a propulsion concept, just so they could, propulsion engineer Jason Cassibry at the University of Alabama in Huntsville said blah, blah, blah. So they gave me this paper, and I really hedged on it because I didn't think that what they were working on was going to get anywhere near the goal that they had. I said, it's going to take a tremendous amount of work, and da, da, da. But they totally changed what I said to Dr. Cassibry says this is going to be the next greatest propulsion system, and it's going to replace gas turbine engines. And I just read that, went, oh my God, I didn't say that. And I emailed, and they don't care. They got their quote. They're moving on.
Exactly.
Wow. It sounds like a teaching style that's like good parenting. Instead of just saying no, maybe the answer for now will turn out to be no, but let's work through all the variables to understand why.
Yeah.
And that way, instead of students or kids in a household learning that, well, what I learned from this experience is dad said no, what they learn to do is think and run the calculations for themselves. I really respect that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Can I ask one question about warp drives before we move on?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it's a nerd question. Okay, when I watch that happen, they're like, okay, we're entering the calculations now. Well, we've got to get out of here. But the calculations aren't ready. The calculations they're running, is there something that I am to believe that is happening in those calculations that will keep them from going through like baseball-sized rocks while they're in warp drive? Because it seems like a baseball-sized rock would be enough at that speed to do an incredible amount of damage to a spaceship. What's the answer for that?
Let's see. So I'm thinking the calculations are a combination of navigation, so you don't fly through a planet, and also some gibberish about not reversing your polaron beams and mixing in too high of a tachyon production rate, because that could create some sort of gravitational anomaly and result in a doomsday machine creation, or some
that was
whatever.
really good.
That all sounded like science.
That was really good.
That was just me barfing whatever random Star Trek words came to mind.
Yeah, it worked on me. It totally worked.
Yeah.
So. But I mean, just in general, any kind of space travel,
yeah.
What do you do about ramming stuff that wouldn't be on a map?
Well, yeah, I mean, just kinetically, if you do the calculation, you're going, like, say, a good fraction of the speed of light, let's say 0.5 c, and you hit a rock. I mean, it's like an atomic bomb explosion, the amount of kinetic energy in that impact. And so how do you survive such a thing like that? And I don't think that's a question that we have a good answer to. I think for now, like a lot of our satellites that we send out into free space is so open that the odds of a collision are really low. And then the collisions that you do have are micrometeoroids, and you're dealing with speeds of like 10 to 20 or 30 kilometers a second if you're talking about deep space. And it's bad, but they just create little craters, and you can kind of engineer for that. But yeah, if you're going 0.5 c and you get hit by probably even a grain of sand would be pretty bad. So I don't know. I don't know how you do it.
There's actually at UAH, there's a light gas gun, and for the specific problem that you're talking about, the micrometeorite impacts, they had to answer that for the space station. And for the PhD topics, when I was starting to sniff around to see what I wanted to do, that was an option. It was this guy named Joel Williamson, Dr. Joel Williamson, used to teach there at UAH. He did a lot of impact studies, and they developed this multi-layer armor for the space station and for satellites. And so part of the strategy is, instead of having one thick piece of material, if you get an impact on one side, it comes out the other, right? Because you get that shock wave that goes through. Part of the strategy is to have multiple very thin layers at distances to slow it down over time. You can stop some pretty heavy stuff, and by heavy, I think like smaller than a BB. But at these velocities, that's significant.
Yeah.
That's a really big problem. You're getting a lot of this stuff, Matt, like just intuitively. You're figuring it all out. It's really interesting.
I don't know, you watch the TV shows and there are questions that stack up in your brain, but then the next plot thing happens and you forget. And now I've got both of you here and they're all coming back to mind.
So this is the big question I had in the class, and I'm just going to let Dr. Cassibry explain the answer to this. So let's say you are able to create fusion in the back of your spacecraft. Then what you have to do is you have to direct the beam of whatever that energy is. You have to direct it away from your spacecraft. You have to deflect it, right? Mm-hmm. And if this reaction is happening at multiple times the temperature of the sun, and we have no known material that can actually withstand those temperatures, how do you keep the back of your spacecraft from melting off?
Well, that is a very good question. There's two flavors of fusion propulsion, or kind of collectively fusion and fission fusion concepts, in which you burn a plasma and then send it out. So you have steady state versions like tokamaks or spherical torus or stellarators, and then they have this thing called a diverter that scrapes off the products that come off, and then they sort of flow continuously through some sort of nozzle, and that would look a whole lot like a rocket or a gas turbine engine. That'd be like a really smooth, continuous stream of flow. And how they do it, the plasma is fairly low density, and so I think the heat flux to the surface is something that probably could be manageable. Maybe you circulate some kind of coolant and then pass it through radiators and keep it cool like that. I'm not an expert on that particular area, but I think that's kind of how that would work. With the pulsed versions that we're looking at, there's a whole class of magneto-inertial fusion, and then there's inertial confinement fusion. And all of those collectively together, I consider them sort of like the two-cycle weed eater of fusion because of the way they work. Like a two-cycle engine, just has like those two strokes. You put fuel and gas in, you compress it, explodes, it blasts out, and then it exhausts kind of like immediately. And that's kind of how these inertial concepts would have to work. And how do they actually keep cool enough?
Before you move to that step, can I kind of slow that down for Matt?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
So imagine you create this plasma cloud. It's literally what it sounds like, just a cloud of plasma. And you were able to use a huge magnetic field, because plasma and magnetic fields, they interact.
Okay.
And you shape that magnetic field in a really fast way, and you squeeze the cloud down really, really small, really, really fast. Can you imagine that?
I can. I mean, this never would have occurred to me in a billion years left to my own thought, but yes, I can picture it.
So you squeeze that cloud down to a very, very small point, and we're talking about over the span of, what are we at, femtoseconds, Dr. Cassibry? What time scale are we talking?
It's not that short. Implosions would vary from maybe 10 microseconds, that's on the long end.
Oh, okay.
Down to maybe 100 nanoseconds, the compression part of it. Let's say between, 10 nanoseconds and 10 microseconds. That's about the right order of magnitude.
In high-speed physics and stuff, Matt, that's a really long time. So, like, the high-speed camera that I use to capture bullets flying in a field of view, if I can take a picture that's 2 microseconds in exposure time, then I can make the bullet look like it stopped. But if I take a picture that's 10 microseconds of exposure time, then you'll get a little bit of motion blur on that bullet. You got a feel for that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I actually think about time in terms of bullet blur. That's how my brain works. And so he's talking about just at the point of bullet blur to below that, a couple orders of magnitude below that. So that's the time scale we're talking about.
Wow.
So you take this plasma cloud and you squeeze it really hard, really fast down to the smallest point you can imagine. Like you try to take it down to a single point. And then because all of that plasma is moving in that direction, am I getting this right, Dr. Cassibry? That's the magneto
sounds good.
inertial fusing. The inertia is the speed at which I'm throwing it all together into a singular point. And then once it gets there, at that very, very small central core, the little bitty tiny grain of a compressed plasma cloud, that's when the boom happens. Right or wrong?
Okay, question. I can picture the shape of the magnetic field. I can picture the plasma cloud. I'm tracking with all of that. I think I can even, I can't picture it, but I'm tracking with what you mean about the rate of time. But where is this all happening? Is this in an apparatus? Is this outside an apparatus?
This reaction would take place effectively inside the nozzle near the focal point. Let's say if it's a paraboloid, it would kind of be close to the focus of that paraboloid. So you would create this implosion, which would compress the fuel down and heat it up, and then it explodes, and then it expands out very quickly, either against a physical nozzle or against a magnetic nozzle, and then gets redirected out the exhaust.
So the magnetic nozzle
Yes.
then would solve the melting off the back of your ship problem.
It helps. You still have radiation, which is going to couple into the material. So you have that issue, but you kind of get rid of the...
Let's give him that one, Dr. Cassibry. That was a stretch for him. He did a good job.
Yes, he did.
We gotta give him that. So just so you know, Matt,
I'll take an F plus or a D minus.
No,
Dr.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Cassibry is talking to you like a student in the classroom now.
I'm honored.
You're hanging.
Yeah,
is what I'm trying to say.
You are. You sound just like a graduate engineering student. So you're doing a great job.
Let me ask you another question. I'm trying to...
Wait, before you go to that question, because we have this mental model, I was just trying to give you an attaboy before we move forward. So you use a magnetic field, like a paraboloid magnetic field, and you squeeze that thing down, you make a little boom, and then the boom comes back out. And so before you use the magnetic field to squeeze the plasma, right?
That's one concept, but the field is actually just there to produce thrust and maybe extract power.
Okay. Yeah, extract power. That's what I was going to say. You can kind of get some power off the explosion as it comes out against the magnetic field, right? So it's kind of like a regenerative braking on a car. So as you use the magnetic field to squeeze the plasma down, as it goes boom, you can kind of get some of that energy back by using it in reverse, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Okay. Good job. Yeah.
Okay.
Your turn, Matt. Sorry.
So then my question in keeping with that would be, how much does heat dissipate in space? Because like if I hold something hot in my hand, like one of those little shake up when I go fly fishing in cold weather, little chemical reaction pocket warmer things. If I hold that in my hand in still conditions right here in my office, I feel like I'm getting almost all of that heat. But if I were to drive in my car at 60 miles an hour and hold that out the window, I don't feel like I'm getting all of that heat because that type of heat dissipates as it comes into some kind of resistance. Is there any kind of resistance or dissipation that would happen because you're traveling at a fast rate of speed? Or is that going to dissipate at the same rate in space as if you were just firing those and theoretically standing still?
The whole issue of focusing on the heat is a really good one because as excited as we all get about doing the fusion or the propulsion part of it, the heat and thermal management can make all the difference in the world in terms of whether or not that vehicle and mission design close or not. And but what we mean by that is, let's say you wanted to go to Mars and you had a system that was, let's say, 25% or 50% efficient and kind of run all the numbers. And then you realize, crap, this thing heats up too much in the nozzle, so we're going to have to make it bigger. Well, that makes it heavier. That means you have to carry more fuel. And suddenly you've worked yourself into a situation where the vehicle can't do the mission because of the heat loss or the heat loads on something. That's a really good question to ask, and it's an important one. In fact, we're working on an issue about that right now this summer for Rob Adams' PUF concept, pulsed fission fusion hybrid. And unfortunately, going fast in space doesn't give you any benefits in terms of cooling. About the best you can do is the farther you get away from the sun and the farther you get away from planets which are reflecting sunlight, the more you're basically radiating to just cold space, which has like a background temperature of maybe 4 Kelvin or something really, really cold. But the only way that you can cool is radiative cooling.
Do you understand that concept, Matt? I mean, you asked an incredibly good question. It's like this. The other day, I was making some craft stuff with Sadie, and we were using a hot glue gun, and she had it turned on extra hot.
Okay.
And I got some of the molten hot glue on my finger, and it was stuck to my finger, and I had nothing. There's nothing I could do. I had this really hot piece of glue on my finger, so instantly, I just stuck it in my mouth. I just stuck it in my mouth as quick as I could to try to take some of the heat away from that hot glue with my saliva. That's what I did, and it worked. The reason it worked is because I had the ability to conduct heat away from the hot glue to my tongue and to my spit, because I could touch those two pieces of mass together and take heat from one of them and put it in the other. In space, you can't touch anything. You can't even blow air across it, which is basically a similar thing. All you can do is take the light from it that you can't see and project it out to space. That's what Dr. Cassibry's saying right now. And that is very, very problematic because all the heat is stuck to you and you can't get it off. So what you said intuitively is a great question. In fact, the International Space Station, you know, those big things that stick out to the side of the space station, you know, you got the big circular things that people are in and the space.
Yeah, I physically saw the space station one time with you.
Yeah, that's right, during the eclipse. So those things that are sticking off the side are what? Those big square things that sticking off the side of a space station. What are those?
I've always assumed they were some kind of solar panel or something. I have no idea.
That's half right. Those other things are radiative heat cooling. That's what they are. They push heat away to the void of space using only radiation.
So it's not like a heat sink. They're just pushing that heat out further, and just by distributing it as far as it can be distributed within the structure of the space station. Am I understanding that right? So the idea is just take heat that would be the size of a baseball and spread it out to the size of a baseball field.
And then push it away from the spacecraft using radiation.
And then push it away.
So Dr. Cassibry, what's the... So you've got this big square solar panels. What are the other things on the space station?
I believe those would be the radiators.
And could you briefly explain to Matt how they work?
They basically help control the temperature of the space station by radiating the excess heat away from it. If you want to get a feel for radiators, if you have an electric stove, just turn a burner on, don't touch it. But if you get your hand close, you can feel the warmth of it, just like you can with the campfire. And that's, that's infrared radiation. And the ones on the space station also would be in the infrared too, I think.
Yeah. It's cool stuff, man. You're asking good questions. So, Dr. Cassibry, we have spent a lot of your time. Thank you, first of all. But is there anything that you're working on right now that you're excited about, you just want to tell people about?
Yeah. So I have a lot of irons in the fire. One of the things I'm working on is, so you remember one of the projects that we did in the class, the magnetic nozzle problem?
Oh, yeah.
One of my PhD students, Nathan Schilling, has a NASA fellowship to work on that. And so we have made a lot of improvements to that initial first cut at the magnetic nozzle problem. Basically, he's working on how, if you have an explosion in your nozzle, how do you siphon off some of that energy to recharge your system and produce thrust at the same time. So it's very complicated when you try to think through all the details. And so he's got a really nice model that allows him to pulse recharge the reactor, reset this magnetic nozzle seed coil, and deliver thrust with whatever energy is left over. So he's been working on that. We're doing thermal management for the PUF concept this summer. And I'm also working a little bit with nuclear thermal propulsion as well with Dr. Dale Thomas.
Oh, you're working with Dr. Thomas?
Oh, yeah. He's really fun to work with.
Okay, Matt, so Dr. Thomas is a legend. He worked out in Houston in the late 90s, early 2000s, if I recall correctly, and he was running the systems engineering for the space station while it was being built. You could say, this might not be a stretch, you could say that this man was one of the people in charge of building the most complicated thing ever built by humans. Is that safe to say?
Wow, I didn't know that. I'm going to have to ask that story. I didn't know that about him.
I asked around a little bit and I started learning things, and he was using examples in class like, when I put a transmission in my pickup truck, but at the same time, he would go to the next slide and he would say, oh, here's the thermal management system on the space station. I was like, holy cow, this is great. Very Alabama. I love it. So those are pretty good projects. Are they all funded?
Oh, yeah. These are all funded projects. It's a lot of fun to work on things, but it's even better when they pay you. So
that's the rumor.
That's awesome. So I'd like to end on one thing, if that's okay. So,
sure.
Matt, you did a lot of teaching at the college level, and you like to make it fun, right?
Yeah.
You want to tell Dr. Cassibry a couple of your little techniques?
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, I'm game. Thanks for lobbing me the softball.
Oh, it's good.
I taught humanities, philosophy, history, some theology, religion kind of stuff. What I really wanted to put my energy into was making those freshman courses engaging and getting the students who weren't sure if they were going to really stick with this thing to kind of have their college brain turned on. I would structure my class in such a way that you couldn't pass unless you did all the reading. Got to do it. And when we come in, I'm not going to tell you all the reading again. We're going to talk about what it means and what happened and why it matters. And we're going to process that. And I'm going to add more data to the equation. And so I would do a reading quiz at the beginning of class, and the students would have to take that quiz. And that was our attendance, effectively. You couldn't pass the class if you didn't have the reading quiz components. But then that made it so that effectively with freshmen, instead of just doing raw lecture, we would think and we would engage. And to encourage participation, what I would do is I'd have this big bag of game pieces from different historical simulation board games. And I'd have basically like the pawns, like if you're playing Axis and Allies, like your Russian infantry unit, little single unit guy. And then what we do is if a student weighed in or contributed in a way that demonstrated that they'd read or paid attention or were starting to synthesize ideas, I'd just throw them one of those game pieces and tell them to save it. And then we would do a great big barbecue game night at my house once or twice a semester.
Wow, what a good teacher.
We would do a military historical simulation of whatever era we just got done talking about. And they could bring all the pieces they earned to give themselves this gigantic advantage in the early game. And then they would get different degrees of extra credit depending on how they fared in the simulation game. And so it all kind of tied together, and I thought it was kind of fun.
That is fun. And by the way, my philosophy courses in college, I think, were the hardest courses that I took. I could read the same sentence 5 times and still not understand what the heck I was reading. And then, you look up a word, what does existentialism mean? And then you go read the definition. Crap, now I've got 3 more words I have to go read the definition of. And for too long, you forget what you were doing.
If it makes you feel any better, that's my discipline, and I still read the same sentence again and again and again. I don't know what the heck it means. That ain't easy.
Yeah.
Have you found, though, that some of that just raw abstraction training, like philosophy or even the historical disciplines where obviously you can't repeat the phenomenon like you can in your discipline.
Yeah.
Did you find that any of that really abstract reason stuff carried over and was helpful in what you do as a discipline?
It does. And I think you could apply that in a lot of different ways with a lot of different people. And for me personally, of the 3 philosophy courses I took, besides just enhancing one's vocabulary to speak more fluently with people and with better accuracy, one of the courses I took was called Minds and Machines. And it's basically a semester-long debate on whether or not to give consideration to, for example, a computer. Is there a subjective experience to being a computer like there is to being a cat or a bunny or a squirrel or something? And it kind of sort of helps you. I mean, when you work on your laptop, you're not worried, am I injuring this laptop when I type on it really hard if I'm stressed out? But I mean, it just kind of helps you kind of think about everything and kind of give it that consideration that, this is it helps you respect life, for example, and just kind of think twice about whatever you're doing. There's a bug, let's not step on it, kind of thing, just because it's in the way. I definitely think those courses are helpful, especially in helping to develop your mind and kind of frame your sense of ethics and logic.
One thing that Dr. Cassibry did in class, Matt, is it sounds silly, but it wasn't. I became emotionally invested in this part of your class, and I don't know why. But there's this character named Brock Blastoff, and he has a nemesis named Captain Argblar. And I would just, if you don't mind, could you just kind of give Matt a little bit of the backstory and tell us who these characters are and what they're doing?
Sure. So Brock Blastoff is a character I came up with that generally shows up in the grad courses that I teach. He'll show up in a homework assignment here or there, or in an exam or a project. And sometimes part of the exam, requires folding him or his crew into the calculations or figuring out things. One time I gave bonus if they could come up with a good catchphrase when he defeated Captain Argblargblar. If I liked it and it got me a laugh, I gave you a point or something. But it was just first class I ever taught was electric propulsion. And this was before I was a tenure track professor. And I was driving to work one day thinking about what the homework should be. And I just thought, for some reason, this name just popped into my head. Brock Blastoff. Yes. Okay. And then I had all of the inspiration I needed to come up with what I was going to ask them to do. And then it just kind of evolved from there. Argblargblar is this nemesis. It's iffy as to whether or not he survived their latest encounter. So we'll have to see how that unfolds. He's sort of like a space pirate.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe him as space pirate. Like, Matt, you don't understand how emotionally invested we as a class got in the success of Brock Blastoff, and some would root for Captain Argblargblar at times, but we would...
Some people just want to see the world burn.
They do, or in this case, fusion burn. Yeah. What we would do is he would hand out the homework, and we would all take a roll and read the question. I'm going to read you the final question for the final exam of this semester. That's cool.
Oh boy.
And
with panache, if you would, please.
Yeah, but here's the deal. With fusion, the problems are very difficult. So for anybody at home that's going to be working this fusion propulsion problem, just know that sometimes the numbers don't work out. And if you go talk to Dr. Cassibry, he'll help you figure out where your problems are, in your equations. But here he goes. This is question number 4, final exam, MAE 795. This is like one of the top classes you can take at the school. Sir, the Mark 20 puff targets have a 0.1 kiloton yield when they go critical. Sir, these were designed for the Kuiper belt, class battleship propulsion. If it goes off near our little ship, we'll be nothing left. Then hurry up and load the railgun accelerator. When it goes off, it'll give the illusion they got us. And so basically, you are in this ship, and all we've got are these targets, but what do we do? And he's like, blow them up, because here's advancing the plot. We'll cloak and make it the rest of the way undetected. The young ensign prepares the target into the sabot and places it into the railgun chamber. The low-frequency hum can be heard as the high-voltage power supply begins charging up the capacitors. Sir, long-range sensors are being fed into our intercept model and the ship's computer. It's now or never. Fire! The spacecraft recoiled violently. The camera filming Brock's crew shook violently, and everyone tumbled about in a high convincing manner. Meanwhile, on Sedna, Yar! The neutron cannon be charged up. So long, Blastoff. Fire the cannon at a full power. But just as the first mate pressed the button, a warning light came on about the near relativistic projectile on course to hit their position in seconds. The ion grids began glowing white hot as the high potentials accelerated deuterium into the tritium target with a narrow neutron beam so intense that it nearly boiled particles spontaneously out of the vacuum. In 20 microseconds, the beam had only reached 200 meters away from Captain Argblargblar when it met its unintended target. Assuming a 10% burnup of fission fuel, if the yield was 0.1 kilotons, approximately how many fission reactions occurred? Assume each reaction produces 160 mega electron volts of energy. And that's worth 10 points.
That is a masterpiece.
It's a masterpiece, Matt. And so
Let me make sure I understand, though. So this didn't just happen in a vacuum. Oh, bad pun. Unintentional. This didn't just happen in a vacuum. You worked all the way up to this moment in the plot. So you know these characters and you understand where you are in terms of the geography and everything here. This question is actually telling you things about how it works out.
Yeah, I know where we are in the plot. I know where we are in the solar system. I know maybe while we're at this location, depending on where we are in the semester. And I know, I am emotionally invested. And I know half of his ship got blown up last time. And he's, trying to limp back home or whatever is going on. I know all this stuff. And then I have to sit down. I'm like, oh, God, now I have to do the mean free path calculations. Let me go back to the Navy Fusion Handbook and calculate what kind of target is that? Okay, I'm shooting deuterium into tritium. Is that? Yeah, okay. those are the types of things that are going on in your head. And I love it. And I just want to say thank you for making it fun, Dr. Cassibry. It was great.
You're welcome. I have a lot of fun teaching it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And Matt, you can appreciate all that, right?
Oh, that's the comment I was forming on my lips as you said it. Yes, I can appreciate that. I can appreciate it from a perspective of all of the utterly miserable college and graduate courses I've sat through, and contrast that with the tiny little handful of professors who put in the energy to make it awesome like that. I love it.
There you go. If you are interested in propulsion in general, if you're interested in understanding how spacecraft work, if you're interested in pushing the very boundaries of human knowledge and capabilities in terms of exploration in the entire universe, then might I recommend you consider a course at the University of Alabama in Huntsville under Dr. Jason Cassibry, or at least go watch some of his talks online. How's that? I sold you hard. That's the best I can do.
That sounds great. Well, thanks, guys, for having me on your podcast. It's an honor to get to speak with you.
It was great to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you, too. And holy cow, excellent questions and comments. You're not the novice that you claim to be. You know your stuff.
I most certainly don't. I just literally watch sci-fi shows and then ask you questions. That's a testimony to how good the consultants on those shows do, I guess.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cassibry. I really appreciate your time.
You bet. Take care, guys.
I hope we get to do this in person sometime over some barbecue, gentlemen.
Oh, that sounds good. Yep. All right, take care.
Okay, so what's the idea, Tina?
You guys need to take that sound that Matt did and make it available for the... I am not falling for that one.
I don't know.
No, you guys need to make that available. You did make a lot of sounds. The most annoying sound in the whole world. That sound.
I don't know which one she's talking about, Matt.
Like when I was like, hey, that one?
Is that the one, Tina?
No.
Oh, no. I bet it was one where I was like,
Is that the one?
No, pitch it up a little higher.
That's great. Was it that one?
No.
Right on.
So what's the idea? I don't, Tina, I mean, you spend a lot of time with the recordings and you edit all this stuff. I don't really understand the pitch you're trying to say. What is the idea?
I am not going to make that noise. I don't think I could even make that noise if I tried. That is a Matt Whitman special.
But for the sake of discussion, let's pretend we know what noise you're talking about.
What
would you be proposing regarding this noise?
I would propose that we take that Matt Whitman special and we make it available to the patron to use as a ringtone. I mean, wouldn't that sound great every time a text came in?
Oh, yeah.
And there was that sick bleeding noise that just played. Yeah.
I thought we were talking about the same sound. Now I'm not tracking.
I'm confused now. I thought...
Tina, could you do just a little bit of the sound you're referencing so we have a common point of context?
I don't understand what you're saying, Tina. I mean, you're sounding a little crazy right now.
A little crazy.
I probably am a lot crazy listening to your guys' stuff to edit it. So, yeah, that would be it. So here. All right, I'll play. Here we go. I don't even know if I can do it. Yeah,
thanks,
see what I'm saying? Sick. I'm so glad that you guys are such dorks.
That's worth it. So where is that, Matt? Where can people get this if they want it?
I think they should be able to get it at patreon.com/nodumbquestion.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
That's
a great idea, Tina. All right. There you go. Thanks.
Anytime.
I think our work is done here. I think that call was worth it.
I think our work is done here.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know what, Matt? You are such a bad influence on me.
I've been a bad influence on you for a decade, Tina, and I hope that I'm a bad influence on you for decades to come.
How about that, man?
Dude, that was spectacular.
Yeah, wasn't he amazing?
It was just really, really genuinely fun.
You can tell why I loved that class so much. There's just something about a professor that takes it seriously. His research is obviously very, very serious. He's funded by NASA, and he's been funded by all these huge, Department of Energy has looked at him and stuff. He is the guy, but he kind of humbles himself in the classroom so that you feel like you're interacting with a peer. Like at some point in there, did you feel like you were just talking to a buddy?
Absolutely. In terms of the interpersonal thing, I never for a moment ceased to be in awe of the enormous reservoir of knowledge on the other end of the phone. But yeah, he just came off as a humble, cool, decent dude. And the thing that stood out to me, though, that stands out to me about other professors I've really respected as well, is that there is such a difference between the dude or the lady who gets the degrees they have to get and they learn the information that they need to get other people to repeat on tests, and then they relay that information. That's fine. That's what a lot of people do. But there's a huge difference between that and the person who loves their subject matter and thinks about their subject matter when they have spare time, sitting on the toilet, driving the car, spacing off during a TV show. You can just tell that guy thinks about this all the time because he loves it.
Yeah.
And that's contagious.
It is. It is. That genuine interest and curiosity and desire to know more and ask the questions. That's contagious. It really is. And I feel like I'm a better person for having taken that class because I'm more well-rounded, because it's a topic I know nothing about. But now I have a whole vocabulary I didn't have before I take it. But there was this other component that made me better, and it was him being willing to let me ask questions that may sound dumb. Like the question you asked about what's the difference in fission and fusion, I walked in that classroom thinking I knew the answer, but within a couple of lectures, I realized, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. You either walk in humble or you're humbled by the topic. And in this case, he just made that a really easy pill to swallow.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are people who present themselves as they make you feel like you could ask whatever, and you're not asking a question that is going to embarrass yourself or put you in another strata. And he exuded that right from the get-go. And honestly, one of the reasons that when I was working with high school kids way back in the day, I'd be like, hey, go to college. It's okay if you don't know what you want to do, but you want to go to school. Just don't major in anything right away. Take your core classes. You're going to run in to some professor who loves what they're doing. It's going to be contagious. You're going to fall in love with it. And then you won't even have to debate or think about what you want to major in. You just aren't going to be able to help but keep asking the questions that take you down this road. And then you're going to be happy and you're going to thrive and you're going to make awesome contributions. And Dr. Cassibry is the kind of professor that I was envisioning when I was urging kids to think about that.
But there's more to it than just that. Like Dr. Cassibry is like top shelf academia type stuff, right? And so, if you want to do propulsion in rockets, we call UAH rocket school, right? That's why he's here. But this doesn't have to happen in an academic setting. I firmly believe that. Like that type of, hey, I've done this for years and I know this topic backwards and forwards, whether it's plumbing or any kind of skilled trade or craft or
Absolutely.
Counseling or whatever, you can be like that. I can be like that in all these other areas. Like I have felt the same type of relationship to how do I put this? So Destin, the student, is to Dr. Cassibry, the professor, as Destin, the Little League baseball parent, is to a guy named Chris as a baseball coach. The way Chris interacts with his team makes me want to be a better father. And the way Dr. Cassibry interacts with his class makes me want to be a better student. These types of relationships happen outside of academia, inside academia, but it's just, is there a word for what I'm trying to describe?
Well, it's mentoring and modeling, those two things together.
Okay.
That's what you're describing, because it's, Chris, who we both know, who's your kid's Little League coach, who's spectacular. He's not your mentor, but he models something that the minute you saw him start doing that, you were on the horn with me. You're like, this baseball coach is spectacular. Here's what he's doing. He's modeling something. He's not in a position to mentor you, but he's still in a position to teach you just by what he's doing. Whereas Dr. Cassibry, a professor, especially at the level you're at, really effectively is a mentor. And so he's teaching you stuff, he's modeling stuff, but he's also very intentionally mentoring you. And yeah, you're right. Academics is what we connected over today, but there are a whole bunch of places where you can get that. It's just that I think a lot of the times we don't really have our radar out for it, and those opportunities might kind of sneak past us.
Yeah. There's a lot of relationships where that is a very formalized thing, like with Dr. Hazeli, for example, my direct advisor at the program. That is a formalized relationship, whereas this one is more of a relationship of choice. It's an interesting thing. Anyway, good job. Holy cow, man.
Thanks.
Excellent work asking the right questions. And the only thing that separated you from those questions you were asking, you're just a few equations and a couple projects away from doing the same work that I did in the class. It's just developing the understanding of all the physics going on there. So great work, man. You waded out into my water and just slayed it. So thanks, man. Appreciate it.
That means a lot. That was really fun. Really fun.
Sweet.
And I feel like I understand it way better than I did. And I feel like questions that I've wondered about for a really long time, I actually have some direction on that now. It was a blast. Thanks for letting me be a part.
So give me a rundown on fusion propulsion for rockets.
Okay, well, fusion propulsion for rockets, it's tricky because you're trying to create an incredible amount of concentrated energy in a contained space to mush together two things that don't want to go together. But the reason it's hard is the reason you want to do it because, well, the reason it's hard is why it produces so much energy. The trick after that is figuring out how to direct that energy. It sounded like you guys were saying that the most common way to deliver energy from a fission reactor, and maybe presumably the same for a hypothetical fusion reactor, would be with the turbine model, generate, electricity in ways that we're used to. But that wouldn't necessarily be the case because we have to think about all kinds of tricky externalities to the simple power creation equation when you're putting it on a metal vessel in space and when you have to direct that. So just creating generic energy for delivery, I guess, is probably different, if I'm understanding you guys correctly, than thrust, targeted energy that moves something. You guys threw out a couple of different principles for how to direct the fusion once you've figured out how to make it. And that, not figuring out fusion, seemed like the most challenging part of the equation to my simple, uninformed brain. Am I in the zip code?
Absolutely. So why is fusion propulsion interesting to humans?
It expands our range, for starters. It's interesting to me because when I played Master of Orion, which is a super old 90s PC game where you gradually develop technology and develop a fleet and expand and build colonies. I mean, it's humanities and science mushed together. That game is what we do. One of the things that was really intriguing to me was like I'd throw my energy very early on into expansion, and expansion was fuel type. If you beat everybody else on the fuel type, what else was really cool is that it gave you all kinds of design options for your ship that opened up all sorts of other things militarily and in terms of cargo, space, human transport, all of these kind of things, because you weren't bound to this one clumsy design that came with chemical propulsion or whatever. And so it seems like the same principle would be true here. If you get to this really refined version of propulsion, it's going to open up all kinds of other things that we didn't get to or talk about in terms of applications and what you can do with the vessels you design.
Has fusion occurred on the Earth yet? Like, have we created a fusion reactor? And if so, what's the current status of fusion reactors?
Well, I at least got the impression that we, quote, don't have one of those on hand yet. So I don't know if maybe in some primordial moment there was some kind of fusion that occurred, but I think everything we've been able to control has been fission. Now, you surprised me by saying that antimatter is actually a thing. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know that lightning creates antimatter. I don't understand how that works. But no, my impression is that we're not quite there on the fusion thing yet. Did I read that wrong?
Well, there are fusion reactors, but their gain is less than 1.
Oh, so it doesn't cross the break-even point.
Exactly, yeah.
So those are only useful to note for the learning process to get to something better later.
Absolutely. Dude, you nailed it, man.
Okay, I'm tracking.
I am so proud of you, man. I really am. Genuinely, I'm proud of you for kicking that brain into the next gear. Just hearing you ask the questions gave me a more fundamental understanding of the challenges at hand, and proud of you, dude. Good work.
I'm honored. Happy to be useful in some small way. That's cool.
Nope. On this episode, I get the last word. Good work, Whitman. Proud of you. Have a good one.